Hello, today I wanted to talk about how I take a reference photo like this and deconstruct it so I can use it as a reference to paint. I've struggled with this in the past to take a really complicated photo like this, and where do we start? If there's too much detail, it's really hard to see where to begin, and hopefully I'll show you how I do it, and hopefully it's going to help you take any complicated painting. It doesn't really matter how complicated it is. Once you have a simple technique and a process, it should go a lot better. So I have a photo here. I actually generated this using AI. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it could be any photo. I just don't want to have any problems with copyright issues, although, AI is kind of issues anyway. Okay, so what I do is I try and see through the layers of the painting, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Bear with me. Is I try and ignore things in my brain. So I'll ignore the trees and pretend they're not there. I need to get to the back and make my way forward. So they're in the way, so just pretend they're not there. Pretend these rocks are not there. Pretend these are not there. So what you're looking for are the big shapes that actually matter. By that I mean it's usually in landscape anyway, it's landmass. So we've got this big mountain area. Join them together. So we have this is one. Perhaps you'd want to do this one because it's very different to the rock area. Of course you have the sky. I mean, we always have the sky. So we start one, and you come forward two. Three sort of optional. You could leave that. And then you'd have number 4 being this big mass down the bottom. Ignore the path for now, it doesn't really matter. So 4. So any nice composition will have 3 or 4 or 5 maybe big shapes. If it has any more than that, it's usually a sign that it's not going to work. It can have as little as 2 or 3. When you start going 5 or 6, it's not going to go well. Generally because it'll be too complicated and confusing for the user, the viewer. So 4 is good. So if you're trying to look for photo references, try and see these big shapes and do they have too many of these. Okay, so once I've had that, what I look for, so we're going to start with the sky. I'm not going to actually paint this. I'm just going to show you how I do it, and maybe I'll do a quick sketch to show you where I get the base to start from and then to break it up. So what you want to do is you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then once you have those shapes, you break it up again, and you break it up again, and you break it up again. So let's do that. So obviously, if you're creating another, and you create a new layer for the sky. Okay, let me do a quick demo here. So let's pretend I'm just painting all of it in a little square down here, and I'll just scribble it in. I won't try and do it properly. So for demonstration purposes, let's just nick the sky color. Right, so we're after this big mountain shape now. So the next important step is how to get the colors. Now, I don't recommend picking the colors off here all the time because you won't learn how to do them. So generally I won't, unless I'm getting stuck. Even though I've done this hundreds of times, sometimes picking the colors from the wheel is hard. I get that. So if you struggle with it, try and get it without. And then if you can't, then sometimes I have a look to see what it does, and it's like, okay, it's over there, it's there. And then try and learn where they actually are. That's a good practice. But you don't have to be correct. You just have to be close. So the next step after I have the sky, let's make sure I'm on the right layer. Make sure you go a bit further just in case the sky pops out underneath when you start building up the layers. So now forget all this stuff. Remember, you're only concentrating on this big shape. So what you need to do is take one of the darkest colors. So again, ignore the detail. You got to forget that detail exists. For now, you just care about the shape, and you don't have to care about it that much. It just has to be roughly the same shape. But forget the color, forget the snow. The snow is just a detail on top of this landmass. It isn't actually a landmass of snow. So what it is this one's quite rocky. So we want to take a dark color because we'll paint on top of dark layers and it gets lighter and lighter until, well, because this is snow, it gets pretty much white. But it's easier to add and leave gaps rather than try and put gaps in afterwards. I mean, we can do that, and we will do a little bit of that. But so I've got like what is it? It's dark greeny. Well, I mean, it's so dark it's grey. It's not really green anyway. So let's hit the landmass in, and you're not going to see much of this color at the end anyway. So just make sure it's dark. Okay, so we have the landmass in. Now we do the same for number 3. So we've got the sky, we've got the landmass of this. Obviously, it's not mimicking it properly, so it doesn't really matter. And then we need shape number 3, which is all of this dark green stuff down here, which would be around there somewhere, hopefully. Yep. So ignore the trees, get this landmass in. Just the shape. Don't care about the details. Again, ignore the trees. If anything is not land when you're doing the landscape first, ignore it. So if there's houses or poles sticking up or your big rocks, if they're really big, then they're kind of landmass. But if they're small, don't bother. Big buildings, a tower, anything that sticks up in the air, ignore for now, and we'll come to that. So we got, last one is this big chunk of grass. Again, try and find the darkest ones. Ignore shadows because they'll be on top and transparent. So don't worry about those yet. Get the darkest green. Again, ideally work out the color, but I don't want to waste anybody's time here. So whack that in. And obviously take your time when you're doing this. This is just demonstration purposes. So once we have those in, that's roughly what the painting is going to look like, regardless of it being completely messy. Once you have this in, that's a good start. And you want to make sure this is reasonably correct because it's going to be quite hard to change it later. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, if you zoom out, you should really see the thing developing into what it's supposed to be at the end anyway. So now you can start working on the detail. You could put the trees in now or later. It's kind of up to you. Usually I put them in now. So it's almost black, these trees. Now ignore that they got little holes all over the place, and ignore that, they got this little detail. So at this stage, it's just very important that you don't care about detail. So let's just get some of those trees in. Because if you start concentrating on detail, you'll get lost. All we want now is to build it up slowly so we don't get confused, basically. And it makes it much easier and less stressful to break it up slowly. Okay, so we have the trees. Now we might as well put this path in because it's not going to look normal until we've got that path in. Okay, so we got the path in. It's not quite right. So you see here now, this is where you can play around with the shapes and make sure you get the shapes right. And if you don't like some of the shapes, this is the chance you can change them before you have too much detail. So this path is not a very good angle actually, so it might do something like this. And because you're doing it in basic forms, it's easy to change. But you couldn't, if you started doing too much detail too early, you couldn't change it. So as you can see, you zoom out and it's looking fairly similar, but maybe too much path back here. It'll disappear. Make sure for landscape paintings you don't get too neat. That kind of kills it. And one thing you don't want, this thing going miles off. I mean, it's okay to go a little bit off, but not miles off. Now you can reshape it a little bit as well if you want to. Okay, and one thing to check now is to make sure you've got kind of your values close to what you want. So it's easier to see now. Like I think this dark patch isn't dark enough, perhaps. It might be okay. Obviously we can tweak that as we go, but okay, it's looking pretty good now. So you've got your basic layers in. Now, obviously that would take like 20 minutes or something generally, and you'd be a lot neater. You don't have to be crazy neat. Just make sure these, I've done it all on one layer for now, just because it's quicker. But I would put these all on one layer. So I'd have big shape 1, 2, 3, 4, all on one layer, and the trees on another. Perhaps the path on another layer, so if you want to change the path, you can do that later. Okay, so that's so we've done the big shapes. We've got the darkest color of each in there. So now you'd move on to detailing, and generally it's breaking up the shapes again with the lighter values. And now you have to care. So one thing I should have mentioned is at that point I don't care about where the sun's coming from at all. It's all flat. That's kind of why you choose the darkest value, because you're going to add the highlights on later. Now if you add the highlights on, adding shadows is quite tricky, so just go dark to light. It's always easier. So we could go back to this mountain, and because snow is so bright, the highlights, it's not so obvious where it's coming from. The sun's coming from the top right, and it only really gives us away a little bit here and here. Otherwise, it's quite hard to tell. But for this purposes, I'm just going to blast some snow in. Now, this is where you don't need to worry about the trees and things yet. So just care about the one layer you're on. Kind of a bit far, I'm going over the trees. And just concentrate on getting the ones you're on correct before you worry about anything else. And with big strokes as well. Don't worry about trying to be accurate. Now you want some of the shadow in, which is always blue with the snow. We can probably exaggerate it over there. Okay, and then you'll move on to the next one. And the only thing really happening here in the change is this has a two-tone thing going on. And then you can look at the grass. The grass hasn't got much going on really. It's all I've been guilty of this many times, is I always think there's too much going on compared to what there actually is. If you look at that green, it's pretty much the same there as it is there. There's not a huge amount going on. So, but you want a little bit. So take the color and shift it a tiny bit. And so you can tell at least like the sun, is hitting that bit. Maybe exaggerate it a little bit more. So sometimes you want to go against what you actually see. So this reference is rather flat. So that's not going to look so great when you simplify it. So maybe I brighten this up again. But if you're new to this, just copy it exactly and you can't really go wrong. Okay, this again, it's maybe a bit of variation in the. I mean, we're not in the detail phase right now. All we're trying to do is add where the light and the shadow is going. So that's probably about it. Maybe we want some shadows on this path where this tree comes from. So now we can. So without the shadows, things don't look like they're on the floor properly. So we get some shadows in there. And as it hits white, when you hit white with shadows, it generally goes blue. So you can shift it here, so you get this nice blue shadow instead. Okay, once we got that, you can either start adding the details on the rocks now, or you can go to the trees. Obviously the trees have a lot of texture in them, so you wouldn't kind of just blob it on like I did there. You'd want to either use textured brushes, which I don't really use very often. I just make my brush really small and do it by hand quickly. So I don't want to do all that now, but if you like using the nature type brushes, do that. But I prefer to just do everything by hand. I'm not sure why. I used to paint traditionally quite a lot, where you don't really get too much for free and you end up having to paint most things yourself. So just habit, I guess. But I got nothing against those nature brushes. They are pretty cool. So use some of those to speed things up. Okay, so we have that. And now you would really go over again. So what I do is I go back to the sky. Do I need to do anything there? Well, there's not much in the sky, but there's a little bit of bright down there. So I wouldn't skip that. And then I'd be back into this rock kind of section here. And then add that, and I'd be making sure all the details correct in the snow. So I'd be adding texture there. Tidying everything up. Obviously, it wouldn't be this messy normally. This is for demonstration. But then I just go through it again. And as many repetitions as you want until you're happy with it. Before all that detail, I would add these rocks in, though. Oops. Again, I'm cheating here. You shouldn't really nick the colors from the reference. Use your own. I just want to do it quickly. So again, I'd do it quick, and I'd add them over the other side, even if they didn't exist, just so you got a little bit of symmetry. And the more you do this, the more you can go away from the reference. Early on, I would say don't stray from the reference too much. But once you have done this many times, you can stray off quite a lot, and it's not too difficult once you have this process. I mean, you can move things around and apply the same textures and colors just in different orders. So I'd be doing all this rather quickly and messy. That's just my style. I like painting messy. One little trick here is make sure in landscapes is very rare. Anything other than man-made things is not neat. So you would never have perfect curves like this, and it doesn't in the reference either. So just to make it more realistic, just break that up. And even better if it goes around the grass and leaves this kind of grass floating like that. Even if the reference doesn't do it, make sure you break shapes up. These rocks need breaking up too. And then you'd finally start with some of these flowers, and put some of those in. I generally just make up my own colors because it's more fun. And just to reiterate, I would have lots of layers here, maybe like 10 layers, just to make sure I don't make any mistakes. And usually, obviously if I do, I can go back. But at one point, this is where you can put your holes back in right at the end, is the trees would be on a new layer, and then you could use the eraser just to make them blend in better. I can't because they're on the same layer, but what I can do is just paint through them and put some holes back into the trees. Trees are not very solid, so you don't want them to look like a big blob. Okay, so there you have it. That's how I approach pretty much every landscape painting when I'm using a reference like this. Sometimes I make up the thing completely, but that's only because I've done this many times, and I kind of just use from memory the same kind of layout. And using these references are great, and I would do lots and lots of these until you try and make it up yourself. But if that was useful, give me a like and subscribe, and I could maybe show another one. I don't think you can see too many of these because I used to really struggle to do this myself, and it used to take me forever to copy off reference photos, and quite often they didn't look anything like the reference photo because I didn't have a process to break it down in my mind. And I had a teacher online who I did it with. I deconstructed their paintings and did the exact same thing. And that's another good trick too. If you're finding photos hard, copy somebody else's painting, because the thing about the painting is it's not going to have all this crazy detail. Now, if you look at this detail, it's a lot. Now, you don't want to try to copy that. I mean, unless you want to go ultra realistic, but that's going to take a very, very long time. And I'm not really a big fan of ultra realism. It just takes too long and it's kind of pointless. And unless you zoom in, you can't really see it. So I like to try and make my paintings look realistic before you zoom in. So if you zoom in, they don't look great, to be honest, but you zoom out and they look realistic. And that's because you got the values correct, and you get the colors correct, and you get the relationships between everything exactly how, well, not exactly, but roughly how the photo looks. And it's just more fun trying to change it slightly. So the more you do this, the more you'll be able to move the trees, move the path, etc. But early on, just make little tweaks, and don't make big ones. Even I wouldn't make big changes. I mean, you're using the reference for a reason, so obviously it's going to be pretty tricky to make massive changes. Just find a different reference. Okay, I'll stop rambling now. I hope you find this useful, and let me know if you do. Thanks.